Welcome to the Greyfriars Reimagined podcast, where we explore the past and the future of Greyfriars Lincoln, one of the oldest Franciscan friary buildings in England. This podcast is part of Heritage Lincolnshire and City of Lincoln Council's Greyfriars project, which aims to bring the Greyfriars building back into use. This project is funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, the Architectural Heritage Fund, the Pilgrims Trust, and City of Lincoln Council. In today's episode, Robin is talking to Joe Player of PRB Conservation Architects about the architect's role in the Greyfriars project. This episode was recorded in early 2021.
Now then, Joe, thanks for joining us. You have the leading conservation architectural role on the Greyfriars project. Can you just tell us what that actually involves?
Yeah, so our role is to shepherd the design team, which involves others from structural engineers, mechanical and electrical consultants, principal designers who are responsible for health and safety, as well as managing a team of other people who are going to be getting involved, especially at these early stages, for a range of investigations. And what that means is we're here from start to finish to help deliver the project. So we're working closely with the project team, which is the City of Lincoln Council and Heritage Lincolnshire in partnership, amongst others, including the funders from the National Lottery Heritage Fund and beyond, to bring about the change to the buildings. So we work to the RIBA plan of work, which involves early stages, scoping the project, making sure the briefs aligned with the client outcomes and the funding outcomes, taking that through concept design, through the detailed design, statutory permissions in terms of, in the instance of Greyfriars, it's a Grade 1 listed building, and it's also a Scheduled Ancient Monument, so we've got dual consents to follow with in terms of planning to change the use. So its last use was the museum for the City of Lincoln, which has sort of been vacant for about 10 years, but we'll be looking to bring that into a slightly different use for the city centre. You've got listed building consent, and you've got your Scheduled Ancient Monument consent, all of which are sort of three big gateways really, which will be where we're heading towards the end of this year, after which there's a bit of a pause for the funding, and then we go back and we look at the real detailed design and specification for the project works, and then we oversee the works on site and the construction and throughout its life. And then we're also there beyond the end of the project, once the contract's finished, to make sure that once it's in use, it's working as the end users want, which in this case is Heritage Lincolnshire, making sure that they can manage everything, they understand what all the controls are for the buildings and everything in between really. So it's really a sort of hand-holding exercise from start to finish, and listening to everybody involved and making sure that we capture everybody's voices, everybody's input. There's a lot of people beyond, there's a lot more technical input required, and bringing everything to bear to make sure that the project's successful and it's got on a sustainable footing for the future.
Okay, great. I gather that most of the structural inspection has now been completed. How did that go?
Good, for what we can see. So Greyfriars has got a really interesting history. Obviously, it's been there for several hundred years, and as you can imagine, over its lifetime, it's changed quite a lot. There are some things we know and some things we don't know, and the result of which is what we see today. So we can only deal with what we've got, but what we have to try and do is work back from where we are today and understand how it's changed to see where the changes have occurred that may cause potential issues that we can see. So one of the instances we can see is on the south elevation. If you're walking along the broad gate and you look up, you can actually see part of the wall plate projecting beyond the masonry line of the building, and that's because the roof has actually spread ever so slightly, and it's nothing to worry about, so you can walk past safely, but it's evidence that the building has moved. We know it's been re-roofed, perhaps on more than one occasion, and there's nothing to suggest it's moving significantly, but it tells us that there is movement there. And everything in terms of conservation is never a sort of knee-jerk, oh my God, we found something that looks wrong, we must immediately fix it. It's understanding, is it in a state of equilibrium? Old buildings don't just suddenly fall down. They're wibbly and wobbly, but we love them for it. And they're there because they are in a state of equilibrium. They behave very differently to modern buildings. So just because something doesn't look perfect doesn't mean it's broken. So in this case, often is the case. It's a sense of caution, really, and just to understand what you're dealing with rather than rushing into something. So that's the reason why we go through these early investigations. And the structural things we've seen to date, there aren't significant concerns. There are places where there's evidence of movement, which you'd expect. There are places where we've got some open mortar joints, but we might need to do some repointing, but it's nothing structural. And there are areas where we can't get to. So what we did very early was to try and get as close as we could to the roof space inside to have a look at and inspect the timbers. So because it's quite a high volume, we've had a tower scaffold inside at first floor to try and get as close as we can to see what we can. Because outside you can see sort of a bit of an undulating roof line, you can see some deflection. So there are areas where we know that there's water getting in and there are issues. Historically, there's nothing evident at the moment, but it's where you've got evidence of that, it suggests that there are perhaps latent defects that might need to be addressed. So until the roof is fully uncovered, we might not be able to get up close and actually touch everything millimetre to millimetre, but what it does give us is a very good close-up visual inspection as best we can do at this stage.
Promising. We were there a couple of weeks ago, and the first thing I noticed was the tree was missing from the roof. I'm not sure how that's helped your carbon footprint for the future, but it was quite
it might have been holding the whole thing up. We don't know. But
it was quite significantly different because of that. But it must be, with this being a Grade 1 listed building, it must be incredibly difficult to sort of decide on a repair strategy that, one, preserves the integrity of the building, but two, takes it forward into the future, makes it safe for the future, and gives it some purpose. So, that must be a very, very, very difficult balancing act.
It really is. It really is. And I think I must say this probably week in, week out to somebody somewhere or another. It's all about the approach. And for us, it's got to be evidence-led. There's no point us running around a building and saying, "Oh my gosh, this thing needs to be completely repointed," and it's often unnecessary. People do it because they don't understand what they're looking at or dealing with. So the reason why we've approached it as we have is to get a range of investigations to understand what's essential, what needs to be done to either address a problem. So in the case of the roof, for instance, or in case of open mortar joints, or those sorts of things, what's necessary to bring about the positive change that we need, like as you say, to give it the sustainable footing for the future, to make the alterations, and then what's necessary in terms of funding outputs. So the funding outputs aren't just linked to bringing the building back into use and giving the sustainable uses for the future. They're also about community outcomes and social value. So an element of that budget has got to be assigned to interpretation, long-term engagement, educational engagement, and that's throughout the life of the project. So all of these things are in a big melting pot with a big budget, and we've got to try and set priorities. So as I say, we always approach it on the basis of evidence of what's essential, what we need to do to make the change, and what else we need to bring in terms of the social, the community and educational value. And that's always quite clear then. It gives you a guiding light and a bit of a North Star to work towards, and you're not sort of necessarily trying to do too much, because ultimately there's only so much money, and it's in grant aided, and we've got to be responsible with where it's spent.
It is very reassuring to know that money is available for this sort of, to me, essential work. It strikes me that what you got here is a sort of repair shop meets grand design, and trying to match that is very interesting and quite a difficult job to do. Finally, one thing I must ask you, something I noticed on my last visit, the toilet block around the back of the Greyfriars, which to me is, at least the brickwork they've used matches the brickwork on the library, and I assume they've actually built that at the same time. But to quote Prince Charles, it just seems to be a bit of a carbuncle to me on the side of the building. And so I don't know what plans you've got for that.
Funnily enough, it's also the only place in the building that we've found asbestos at the moment, so we've definitely got to do something back there. But part of it's the good old Victorians. They've obviously put the sort of extension on the back at the moment, which gives you the first floor access, and you've got the toilets at the ground floor. Beyond that, there's the sort of modesty wall, which I think is the bit that's sort of slightly contemporary, or definitely erected in terms of with the library bit to sort of screen those toilets. And yeah, absolutely, it doesn't help the setting of the building at all. So I mean, that's part of the building where it's when we do the assessment and we look at, there's already a conservation management plan in place, and a very really comprehensive document which outlines a lot of the history and how the asset should be managed, and where it is more readily that we can make change. So when I say make changes, make alterations to the structure, because everything's covered by the listing and everything's covered by the schedule.
That's great.
Whatever we do, we need to make change. It's an area where we've got more chance of making more change, and actually there are services, toilets, drainage and bits and pieces in that part of the site. If we can redevelop that, make better facilities for the new uses, it's a better place to do it than trying to do it in the lovely ground floor space where we've got beautiful arches and all the rest of it. So
right, great. Joe, thank you for that. I said, hopefully in the future you can sort of come back to the podcast and let us know how things are going. But yes, thank you for that overview. It's been very, very useful, very informative. You take care. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Anytime. Thanks, Robin.
Music was performed by Soundlinks and Hildegard and recorded at Greyfriars. If you would like to be notified when new episodes are released and to learn more about Heritage Lincolnshire's work, please follow us on our social media, which are linked in the description, or visit our website that you can also find below.